So that was the talk on structure, and I hope that helps you. For me, getting your mind around this is extremely useful. And when you are out there flying and you're practicing, ask yourself, okay, where am I? Why does it feel like this? I've hit the sink. Okay, I'm going to expect some shear. Control the wing through the shear. Get into the lift zone and turn. Or I'm in the downward side of the leeward side of the thermal. Yes, it's a bit cuck. Let me push further into the front and continue turning in the front out there. And on that note, if it's, rock and roll and you're close to the terrain, then definitely fly away from it. The more turbulent the air, the greater the chance of collapses. And if you have terrain, mountain, whatever it is next to you, the danger is impacting with it. So you want to maintain a healthy distance away from it. When you are thermaling, the tendency is that you will drift downwind even inside that thermal. So if you are drifting and you're drifting back, push yourself back into the front and then carry on thermaling. We are now going to talk about sources, and we in a few slides ago talked about how a thermal is formed. It's because of the heating up of the ground. The ground is not uniform. We have different types of terrain. You could have a residential suburb, plowed fields, fields that have sugarcane in them, empty fields, parking lots, all different types of surfaces. And they will heat up differently and trap air differently. And so different surfaces there are different surfaces that are good for thermal sources and those that are not. So, for example, a plowed field. Plowed fields are awesome sources for thermals. And the reason why a plowed field is great is because when the ground is plowed, you end up with these ridges and, it's not flat. And what this does, it allows air to be trapped in this next to the ground. And so the base wind is not pushing it along constantly. It has an opportunity to be trapped. And in this time, the ground heats it up. And therefore, it's a good source to go on to become a thermal. Conversely, a flat field doesn't present that same opportunity because the base wind just pushes it along downwind to the next surface. Things like farm buildings and metal structures and so on, these are great sources. You can think about it on a hot day, the sun is shining on the metal surface, it is for sure going to get hot and will heat the air that's next to it. Dark surfaces as well. Though surprisingly, people think dark surfaces and think about tar and be tar roads or a tarred parking lot. Tar doesn't work as good as a thermal source because it actually absorbs a lot of the heat. So that's one factor. And the other, being this flat surface, is that the base wind, assuming there is some wind on this day, is constantly pushing the air away from it, so it doesn't heat up as much. Conversely, though, if you have a parking lot that has cars in it, because the cars are there, they actually trap the air in between, giving it a chance to heat up. And therefore, a parking lot that does have cars in it, because the air is trapped in there, can be a good source of thermals. Do you have a question there, Richard?
No.
Dams and water bodies, this is quite interesting. A big dam, for example, you're going to have evaporation taking place over the dam. Evaporation itself uses up energy, and so the air temperature directly over the dam versus the surrounding land is typically lower. So the dam itself is not a good source of warm air. But what happens with a dam is that you have evaporation taking place, and therefore you end up with humid air above the dam. And then together with this base wind that's pushing the humid air over the, downwind to the land that's next to it, humid air rises faster than dry air. Any guesses as to why that is?
Because you're heating up the water vapor.
It's not about heating up the water vapor, so you were close, but it's the fact that you've got water vapor. And if you think about what water vapor is, there's hydrogen in there. And at a molecular level, hydrogen is lighter than nitrogen and carbon. So dry air, which doesn't have hydrogen, is more dense and heavier than air that does have water particles in it because of this hydrogen element that makes up water. So that leads.
Sorry,
yes.
Can I just? So the very first bullet point, plowed fields.
Yes.
It contains two statements. The one about the plowed field where the air is trapped, and a flat ground which is not trapped. But the second part of the sentence after the comma seems a bit ambiguous to me. But anyway.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I should.
Which allows it to heat up nicely. But you were saying the opposite.
Yeah, so flat ground doesn't allow it to heat up nicely. So I must adjust that sentence. I see what you're getting at. The plowed field, by holding and trapping the air, allows it to be heated up. A flat field doesn't, and therefore a flat ground isn't as good a source as a plowed field.
Cool.
Cool. Thanks for pointing that out, Patrick. I'll amend it before I send out this presentation. Going back to the dams and the humid air. So if we have we know that the dams are providing this humid air, and we've got a nice plowed field next to it on the downwind side that will release a thermal of normally just dry air. The mixing of the humid air with this great source that's downwind of the dam can give you a really good thermal because of humid air combined with hot air that's going up. It will climb quite nicely and be a great thermal to use. So looking at these water bodies, the downwind side can be a great source of lift. Any questions on this, on the dams and the humidity?
No, thank you.
Cool. We're now going to talk about triggers, and some people split triggers up into wicks and triggers. So wick being a passive trigger, which I will go through now, and what other people just call triggers is active triggers where there's some movement involved. So thermals kind of behave like honey in that it sticks to the ground and doesn't want to leave it. And this honey analogy is actually a good way to help you predict thermals. But so it sticks to the ground. It will, the base wind can push it and it'll slide downwind. It will on its own also just slide upwind, but not upwind, sorry, in an upwards direction. So up a slope, up a mountain, going in that upward direction, but they don't slide downwards. So a thermal that is the heat that's built up along the western face of this mountain can slide up the mountain, slide up, and when it gets to the top, because it can no longer keep sliding up, it releases. It doesn't now slide down the other side. So it doesn't slide down at all because it's warmer air and moving upward. And so therefore, things like the tops of mountains, the tops of hills, anything that, the shape is, if a thermal is sliding along it, and this is what you must picture in your mind, this thermal is sliding along and it's getting to this point, it cannot slide any further, it'll release from there. So this also explains why typically when you look out, if there's any clouds in the sky, they will first be over the mountains because of You've got thermals coming from the one side, the other side, perhaps you can have lee side thermals, and they release from the top of the mountain going up to form those clouds. I did say that they can be pushed downwind towards any such trigger. And these triggers are pretty much anything that stops this thermal from sliding. So it can be tree lines, so an edge of a forest. It can be fences, and I'm talking about these 1.2 meter fences along most of the farms in the country. They are thermal triggers themselves, and I have had several low saves. The nice thing about that is when you're next to one of these fences, it's next to a field, so you can pretty much try up until your feet touch the ground. And I have had saves where I was, trying this fence, and if not the fence, then I'm going to be landing in the next few seconds, and found the thermal off the fence, sat in it, and eventually it got better, and then back to 1,000 whatever meters. So the reason is because this fence line is an object that's in the way of the thermal that was sliding along the ground, and therefore it releases. Cliffs, and so in a mountain, mountains are not typically just smooth sloping surfaces. You can have mini cliffs within them, and if you're flying along the mountain, you see a little cliff in there, go fly above that cliff, because if there's a thermal that's sliding up and it reaches this little cliff, it's not easy for it to keep sliding. It can release off the cliff, even lower down. We spoke about the hilltops and mountaintops. What else? Changes in temperature, and I'm going to go back to the dam example. So we spoke about the dam, saying that above the dam that the air temperature is cooler because of evaporation using up energy. But upwind of the dam, you can have warmer air. And so this warmer air that's being pushed by the base wind will slide and collide with the cooler air that's over the dam. And that in itself can act as a trigger, and therefore it releases. And so the edge of the dam coming from the upwind side can be a trigger. It can also apply to clouds and the shade from clouds. So if there's a section of the ground that's in shade for a while, and there's another section that's warm, and the wind is blowing that air that would have been heated up in the warmer section to the shaded part, the change in temperature, that colder air from the shaded area acts as the trigger, and it goes up. So what I've discussed now so far has been passive triggers, and like I say, some people refer to them as wicks. So if you do some other reading, you may see the term wick.
Sorry, Ria, just
yes.
very quickly. So dams, or let's just say bodies of water, you potentially have a trigger on the front, on the windward, upwind side, and the downwind side.
So the upwind side will be the edge of it would be the trigger, but the downwind side, you would be looking for some other trigger. But why you go look downwind is because the humid air that would have now moved over the land and mixed with some other source to go up.
So with the thermal that's triggering off the front of the dam, I'm saying the front obviously being the upwind, the first wind side, then if you were working that side, would you then perhaps gamble and go fly towards the downwind side of the dam to look for the humid air?
Yeah, for sure. If you've got
you've got to climb already from the front.
Yeah, it's depending on the size of the dam, but yes, for sure. Going downwind, knowing that humid air would have gone downwind, that would be 100% correct.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Cool.
Just something from me. Do thermals always need a trigger, or can they just release by themselves? Let's say on a big flat surface, they don't need a trigger, or do they always need something to trigger off?
No, and if you think of something like a farmhouse that heats up itself, and it can leave directly from that farmhouse going up. So it doesn't have to have this trigger. The farmhouse itself acts as the passive trigger in that it's heated up. It cannot go anywhere. It cannot slide down this roof. It is now going to go up. But when you are looking for them, trying to predict it, you would typically find it downwind of that farmhouse because it would slide downwind. And if you didn't find it directly above or just downwind next to the farmhouse, then continue further downwind because it's heated up there and it will slide and trigger off the trees downwind of the farmhouse.
Okay.
Cool. So going back to the slide, the things that we've spoken about are what we call passive triggers or wicks, in that it's the thermal is just sliding along. It cannot slide along anymore because of whatever is in its way, and then it releases. But a thermal can also be released from physical disturbances, or instead of passive but active triggers. And here it could be, so that if you think about it, this field has been heated up, and now there's some livestock that walk across. And because you've got this bubble of air that's heated up and they're on the ground, when they walk across, they disturb it and kind of break the surface tension, and it releases. So you look for your source, and then you see, oh, look, there's some sheep down there, cows, whatever, they're moving around. They could be a good trigger. Cars can also be a good trigger. And if I use a practical example, let's say we've got fields, and downwind of this field is a highway where you've got cars going up and down. So the field is the nice source, and it will slide downwind. When it gets to that highway and it's trying to slide across the highway, the cars that are going up and down disturb it, and therefore it triggers, and you find the thermal releasing from there. Tractors, anything really. I've even heard things that, you know, it can be a mouse in the field that runs across the field and sets off the thermal. So that's active triggers and passive triggers. And the important thing to realize is that you want to look for these triggers, identify them, and then place yourself such that you can connect with this thermal wherever it may be. And we will talk about that some more. Any other questions? Please go for it.